Greetings. Today's Tuesday, October 13th, and we'll be looking at Acts chapter 13. And in Acts 13, there are 52 verses. It's a big chapter, and a lot happens. And so let's get started so we're not dragging this thing out. So we're going to be talking about mainly Paul and Barnabas now. Paul and Barnabas are on the scene, and they are the focal point of a lot of the conversations in Acts in the coming future. And Paul looms as this large character in the New Testament because he's writer of a lot of those epistles, the letters to the early church, and he is this major actor in the book of Acts with Barnabas. Up to this point, something I noticed, up to this point, it's been, they are noted as Barnabas and Saul, and now it's Paul and Barnabas. Just something I noticed coming up, and when he changed his name, he became first somehow. So Acts chapter 13 gives us a model for fasting and prayer. So fasting and praying to be led by the Spirit for action going forward. And after fasting and praying, the Spirit let them know to set Barnabas and Saul apart. So they were set apart from the other believers who are listed there, or the other leaders of the movement in Antioch there. And what happened was they go on a trip, and they encounter Bar-Jesus, or Elymas, which is probably his Greek name or his Roman name. He's a false prophet and magician, not musician, magician. And he is kind of in crowd because he's with the proconsul of the region, the high political actor of the region. And that high political actor is interested in talking with Saul and Barnabas, or Barnabas and Saul as it's listed. And Bar-Jesus, or Elymas, says, no, you don't want to talk to these people. They're charlatans, because he was jealous and he didn't want the word of the Lord to be proclaimed to the proconsul and him to be won over by them. And the relationship might be strained with the magician. So we have this encounter. And in chapter 13, verse 9, before he addresses this confrontation with the magician, it just mentions Saul, also known as Paul, was filled with the Holy Spirit. So Acts 13:9 is where Saul becomes Paul, and it just happens. And I said this before earlier times when we were introduced to Paul, that he just gets a new name. And it's not a new name because it is his Roman name, is what you call him, his Roman name. So Saul, King Saul, would have been his Hebrew name, and then Paulus is the name he would go by as a Roman citizen. So that they call him Paul, and from now on, that's going to be significant, I think, for us, because Luke points it out, doesn't point it out, just kind of makes that change. And then we have Paul as the figure going to the Gentiles specifically. So, but right now he is having this confrontation with this false prophet, and he says, "You son of the devil, enemy of righteousness." He is he just lays into him, and then he predicts that the guy would go blind. The guy does go blind, and the proconsul is sitting there, I assume, in his big armchair. I'm the big proconsul, and he's converted. He's convinced that Paul and Barnabas are the real deal. And so they go on teaching. They go back to Antioch from where they have been. And then on the Sabbath day, they are in the synagogue. And the officials of the synagogue sent them a message and asked them to preach at their home. I feel like they've kind of made a home there in Antioch. So Paul stands up and he begins an oration that sounds an awful lot like Peter and Stephen, talking with the people in the synagogue, which is a place that he would have been comfortable with as a Pharisee. He speaks in the synagogue, spending a lot of time, like Peter and Stephen did, tying Jesus to King David and convincing many to follow them. So that's what happened. The result of that was that many in the synagogue who heard them that day followed Paul and Barnabas. And at the next Sabbath day, the whole town turned out to hear what Paul and Barnabas had said. And of course, the great numbers who were being converted to the way or to be becoming Christians or being added to the church are upsetting the authorities, the powers that be. So they're getting that backlash from that. Something I forgot to mention, and this was in my notes, was that remember John Mark? Mark would be the Roman name, I guess, or Hellenistic name. I'm not sure which is which. But so John Mark doesn't go with them when they leave, when they set off to go back to Antioch. He's with them on some of their trips, and he's with them when they encounter this magician and the proconsul. But then John left and went back to Jerusalem, and they went to Antioch. So I just wanted to let you know who's together with them, who's following them. So they added the followers, and the Sabbath day there were so many people in the town that the authorities get mad. The message resonated with the Gentiles. It was something that they wanted to hear more about. But Paul just says to them, the authorities that are upset with him, he says, it makes sense that we came to you first, since this is the same God. But, if you don't accept our testimony, that's fine. We can't, we'll take it to the Gentiles. And then sure enough, they did. And so, because it's the same God, we just decided we could meet you on your own playing field because we have all this information. So they go through the whole thing of, tying Jesus into the Davidic kingdom and all the history of the children of Israel. And so he just goes into all that. Of course, that he knows all that because he is, even more learned than Peter and Stephen would have been, because he is this Reformed Pharisee. And anyway, so he goes on and on about the same kind of preaching that you've seen before, quotes the prophets, Isaiah, different ones. And then at the end, the Gentiles were the ones that followed them. They became the believers, and the word spread. But those authorities that were angry and were detractors from them, they got in touch with high-standing individuals, and they tried to besmirch the names of Paul and Barnabas and tried to stir up persecution against them. And they drove them out of that region. So they had to leave this place where they were really doing great ministry because of a handful of people. They drove them out, and so Paul and Barnabas went to Iconium, which is a different place, and that's what happened. Something that happened when they left. They shook the dust off their feet in protest. And so this is an archetype that you might remember from the Gospels, when Jesus said, "And go to the homes or the towns." Maybe it was more the towns. "And if anyone doesn't accept you, shake the dust off your sandals and go somewhere else." And so it's not just that, just shrug it off. It's really a sign of protest. It's a sign of you did the wrong thing here. And it's probably something that would be seen as a bit of an affront, or simply saying, "I doth protest," something like that. So that's what they do right before they leave. And then we have the scene in Iconium with Paul and Barnabas and what happens there in the next chapter, in 14. So reading through, this is almost like the Synoptic Gospels. It's the synoptic preaching. So it's the sermon that, you could put together the things that Peter has set up to now and put the things and then fit them into the things that Stephen said in his, which is a little shorter than this one from Paul. And then you have Paul's oration, which they hit the same points as ultimately apologists for the Christian belief and the followers of Jesus. So that's 10 minutes and 10 and a half minutes of Acts chapter 13.